best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a Munter education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. Oh, my God. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Refer the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives. Go to thecvpn.com, Chris Voss podcastnetwork.com. There's over 9 podcasts there. I mean, how many podcasts do you need, people? But there's 9 there if you want them. If you want to see the video version of this interview, you can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, and you can see all the authors we've had on over there as well. And on that, you can hit that bell notification so you get all the different notifications of all the great we have on and everything we're doing. You can also go to amzn.com/shop/Chris Voss. You can see our shop that we have there. All the books of all the wonderful authors we have on the Chris Voss Show. You can take your credit card there, swipe it, and you can buy all the books from Amazon, and you'll be so much more smarter and better looking for that as well. Today, we have on one of the brilliant co-authors of the book, Blood and Oil, Mohammed bin Salman's Ruthless Quest for Global Power. The two authors are Justin Scheck and Bradley Hope. We have Justin here today. And Justin is they're both actually with the Wall Street Journal, I should say. Justin is based in New York. He worked with the Wall Street Journal since 2007, covering white-collar crime across 4 continents. He's been writing about Saudi Arabia since 2016. Justin is a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Welcome to the show. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm well. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate that. And congratulations on the new book. This came out, I believe, September 1st.
Yeah, thanks.
There you go. And it's definitely topical. We just had we'll get into some of the different news stories. But Justin, if you could give us your plugs so people can look you up on the interwebs.
Yeah, so the best place to find the book is probably Amazon, Blood and Oil, or Hachette, HACHETTE.com is our publisher, and there's a page there where you can buy it, also at your local bookstore.
Now, you cover a lot of Saudi Arabia, like we mentioned, for a long time. What motivated you to write this book about MBS?
So I've been based in London. I've been writing about oil and working on various sort of investigative stories for years, and spent a couple of years on a sort of far-flung story about the drug trade between India and West Africa, and sort of coming out of that, I was, you leave behind a big project, and my editor at the time had said, Saudi Arabia is on the cusp of something really, really different, and the news had just come out that this prince, who no one had heard of a year earlier, Mohammed bin Salman, he was the son of the new king, wanted to take the Saudi state oil company, which is the world's biggest company by revenue and probably the world's most profitable company, and he wanted to do an IPO. He wanted to sell shares of it on the international market. And so, I had covered energy for years, but really didn't have a history covering Saudi Arabia. And my editor was like, we need some sort of investigative coverage, digs into what is this company, and go from there. And I sort of kicked and screamed, because that's what a reporter does when your editor tells you to do something. But, within a couple of weeks, Bradley, who does have more of a history in the Middle East, and I realized there's a really deep and complicated international story to be told. And, we started our way in was by looking at the oil company. But, from the company, it's not too far to get to the government, and then to the royal family, and then to, the halls of the palace, where, huge amounts of global power are, fought over by a few guys. And so we were writing on this for a couple of years, and more, we got from the company to the government to kind of the personal palace intrigue, and realized at some point a couple of years ago, there's a book here. This is someone who is taking this insular country and, turning outward and influence, he's become a military power and an economic power and an investing power. And it would just sort of kind of happened organically, if that makes sense.
And in the book, you pretty much you talk about his childhood, his kind of rise to power. You set the stage of the environment in Saudi Arabia, and how he comes pretty much to fruition, and then what he's done since then.
Yeah. So the book really starts with this moment, like, and to go back a little bit to understand who this guy is. A lot of the Saudi princes of his generation, the sons of kings or the sons of princes who are close to being king, are educated abroad, in the U.S. or in Europe, and they have these sort of cosmopolitan upbringings. And this guy was educated completely in Saudi Arabia and spent his teenage years by the side of his father, who was governor of Riyadh province, which is the most conservative, traditional part of Saudi Arabia, or most conservative city. It's the capital. It's the family's center of power. So this guy's the son. He's, a son of the second wife of a prince who seems very unlikely to be king. There's a couple older brothers who are in between him and the throne. And he grows up like not really expecting that there's any chance he could get near the throne. Then two of his father's older brothers die fairly unexpectedly. His father is in line to become king next, but is in his 70s. And the older king, or the older brother who's king, King Abdullah, dies in the end of 2014. And now the crown's supposed to go to Salman, Prince Salman, Mohammed bin Salman's father, but the sons of Abdullah and the loyalists to King Abdullah knew that if Salman became king and Mohammed bin Salman gained power, they'd be cut out. They could lose all their power. They could lose much of their money. There could be even worse repercussions for them. So they started trying to undermine Salman. There were rumors spread on Twitter that he had dementia. They tried to sort of engineer some succession plan where the crown would go down to one of Abdullah's sons. And all of that failed, largely because Mohammed bin Salman got wind of it and got in the way of it. And then the last-ditch effort was to try to prevent him from being in the line of succession, which temporarily worked. When his father became king, the crown prince was another old man, another brother, and the deputy crown prince was a cousin who was older and had a long relationship with the U.S. And in the year or so after Salman became king, that was all upended. And in 2017, Mohammed bin Salman, physically imprisoned in a palace his predecessor as crown prince, in the middle of the night, and forced the guy to resign so that he could become crown prince. So now, while his father's king, he's in line for the throne, but is really the day-to-day ruler of the kingdom and the guy who's making all the big decisions.
The prologue of the book starts out with how he pulls off that I guess semi-coup where they say, hey, we need you to come back and talk to the boss, and like everyone's kind of like, I don't know about this, but he literally sets up these hotels and everything to become prisons, and it's insane. He's like imprisoning billionaires, people that are used to freely going around the world and have all this money, and it's quite the operation.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia for generations has been this really ossified, bureaucratic country where old men were in charge, and they were deeply afraid of any change. And their fear was that any change at all could lessen the family's power, their grip on the throne, and would create upheaval that would be bad. And so over those decades, as the oil industry became bigger and bigger and oil money flooded into the country, there was kind of rampant corruption, and their princes would, bring in kind of well-connected Saudi businessmen and bring in international businessmen. So if, you could get a contract, as an American company, you could get a contract doing oil field services. You have to have like a partner who's a Saudi, maybe a prince, maybe some well-connected businessmen. That partner did nothing but got a huge amount of money. And so there was money kind of leaking out everywhere. And nobody did anything about it. And one theme with Mohammed bin Salman is that he is okay with change. He wants, if he thinks change needs to be made, he wants to do it right now. And he's done that in a number of contexts. But what he did, he saw corruption as a problem. And to be, fair to everyone, we write in detail about how he has enriched himself to an extravagant level on government money. So he's not against, I don't think in principle he's against a powerful prince getting rich from the government. he was just against so many people who didn't really have power doing it. And rather than try to, do the sort of the old Saudi way of saying, please stop doing this, and kind of, quietly behind the scenes trying to wind down the corruption, he, in a very effective moment of sort of creative exertion of power, he took the Ritz-Carlton, which is, it's a Ritz-Carlton. It's built in a building that was built to be a Saudi palace. It's like literally palatial hotel. And he told the Ritz, the government's going to need the facility for the time being, cancel all reservations. And they changed, they put locks, and they changed the locks on the doors. And he rounded up hundreds of the country's most powerful business people. And some of them were princes, some of them were independent businessmen, some of them are, Al-Walid bin Talal, sort of the headliner. He was this prince who was, co-owned the Four Seasons with Bill Gates. He was like people of international repute. And he locked them in hotel rooms and told them, you will pay back some or all of the money that I say you stole, or we'll just take everything and put you in prison. And there have been reports of torture. There were all sorts of none of it was done in a way that's like there's no precedent. There's no kind of body of law for here's how we deal with corruption in Saudi Arabia. He sort of made it up as he went along. And the defense that a lot of these men had was King Abdullah said it was okay, or King Fahd, the king before him, said it was okay for me to do this. And MBS said, well, then it was okay then. Now it's retroactively not okay, so give me the money back. And it was a way of trying to recoup money for the government, but also a way of showing basically you need to do whatever I say, or else something really bad will happen to you, no matter how powerful you think you are.
And this seemed like a real siloing of power. I mean, I think in the book you say that he used it to gain power over different divisions and everything else. I mean, this seems like a real power seize on his part.
Exactly. And before we get into the questions about good or bad, or reformer or not reformer that everyone's asking, the most important thing to understand about his early years is that he is better than anyone else at maneuvering within the palace and within the Saudi royal family. And he outmaneuvered everyone. And largely because he was almost an outsider. He was from a younger generation. What he saw was a system where the sons of the kingdom's founder, his father and three of his father's brothers, basically shared control over the most important government institutions. One prince, who later became king, was in charge of the royal guard, which guards the king. Another was in charge of the Ministry of Interior, which is in charge of intelligence gathering and has military capabilities. Another was in charge of the Defense Ministry, which is the actual military. And another one, his father, was in charge of Riyadh province, which is the center of the coalition between the royal family and the religious establishment, which was their power base. And he saw that this balance of power may have been good for stability in the past, but if he didn't want stability anymore. He wants rapid change. And if he was going to do that, he would need to consolidate that and take over each of these things that for decades had been controlled by other branches of the family. And he managed to do that by outmaneuvering all these people.
And as you mentioned, and it's in the book, I mean, there's a lot of palace intrigue. If you love palace intrigue, this is the book for you, because there's just so many players and so much competitions. But what you guys really detail in the book is how one of the things he's really good at is being cunning. I remember Francis Ford Coppola talking about basically, the three sons in the Godfather series. And when you look at Michael Corleone's the one who survives because he's the most cunning. And so a lot of it maybe was a balance of seizing power and then enacting reforms. The real thing about looking at him is the good, bad, and ugly. And you go, okay, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Or is he a mix of both?
Yeah, and we keep getting that question. What I tell everyone is I have a stock answer, which I think is actually a good answer, which is I think those questions are irrelevant. And there's so much, is he a reformer or is he a dictator? And I think a lot of that is not relevant. The relevant question, the relevant thing to understand is his goal is to maintain power and to maintain his family's control of Saudi Arabia. And I think that's pretty much any monarch has that as the big goal. And to be fair to him, he seems to truly believe that the best thing for Saudi Arabia and the Saudi people is for him to be in power. But the top priority is maintaining power. And so everything he's done is with that in mind. So if you think of him not as, he does some things that make him look like a reformer and other things that make him look like a tyrant, if you think of it as someone whose top priority is maintaining control, then there's consistency across all of this. So the reforms, he's really loosened these social restrictions that have been in place for decades. And they've been framed by Western journalists as reforms. He's reforming Saudi Arabia. He's modernizing Saudi Arabia. And I don't really think that's the way to look at it. First off, I think, the very kind of restrictive Saudi Arabia is itself a modern creation. There was not a precedent for it. But more importantly, the base of power for his family in Saudi Arabia was the religious establishment. And his grandfather conquered the area now known as Saudi Arabia with a coalition of the family and their loyalists and these religious clerics who had fighters. They had fighters in Camelback. And for hundreds of years, the Al Saud, the family, and this religious establishment were the kind of joint power over the region. And the Al Saud's power came from them. And the family felt, the older generations of the family felt like their legitimacy in the eyes of the Saudi people came from their allegiance or their alliance with the religious establishment. And Mohammed bin Salman realized that, that's changed because now Saudi Arabia's population, about 60% of the population is under the age of 30. And they have the world's highest social media saturation. And so he sees, whereas maybe prior generations, when it was a country of 6 million people who were traditional and pious, may have said, well, if the religious establishment says the Al Saud are the rulers, then they must be. This younger generation, they're on Twitter and they're on Facebook and they're on Instagram, and all day long they're looking at their phones and seeing that in other wealthy countries, their peers are going on dates and going to movies and going to concerts. And they weren't allowed, they couldn't do any of those things. There were no cinemas. There was no live music allowed. There were these religious police who, if they saw a woman with ankles showing, could arrest her. And he realized, or he believed, or he decided that if this went on, it would lead to great discontent. Also, you couldn't get jobs. It was hard to start a company. And he realized that if he wanted legitimacy, his base of power would have to switch from the religious establishment to the country's burgeoning youth population. And so the social reforms have been done with that in mind. Some of the crackdown on dissent, he allowed women to drive and locked up the activists who were calling for women to be allowed to drive.
Yeah, I was really.
And they seem contradictory, but actually they're not, because allowing women to drive is something to, satisfy the people who he needs to be satisfied. And locking up the people who protested the government shows that if you in any way criticize me, you're going to go to jail. And it's all, to the greater end of kind of solidifying power.
It's a really interesting balance. That's what I think that makes him most interesting or most curious. That's what I loved about the book, and why I think a lot of people try and figure him out. Like Silicon Valley has a huge love affair with him because of the money issue. And you guys talk about this in the book, how they have these huge tech dreams. It seems like they really want to compete with Dubai and build something bigger and better. They got rid of the morality police that were running around going, that skirt's too big. But like you say, there's that balance of almost like an authoritarian power. It's kind of almost like what Machiavellian, advised in The Prince, where you have to be a benevolent king, but then you also have to have an iron fist, and you have to balance the two.
Yeah, we actually have a scene in the book when he's young and he goes to visit a cleric who is now, who has since been sentenced to death in Saudi Arabia. And he talks about his admiration for Machiavelli, which was...
Wow.
So, and to be fair to him, I think this can be seen as his admiration for the tactical lessons you can learn, not necessarily saying he's unprincipled. Mm. But yeah, there's a... I think the best light in which you can look at it, to be generous, is that let's assume he truly believes the best thing for the Saudi people is that he be in charge. To make sure he's in charge, he had to do a lot of things that in a country like the U.S. would seem brutal or iron-fisted, as you put it. And I think one of the things that is very hard to accept from for an American is the prohibition on criticizing him, and that's not a traditional thing in Saudi Arabia. Historically, like, you could criticize the monarchy, and he's realized the power, or he believes social media is extraordinarily powerful. He may think it's more powerful than it really is, but he believes that criticism of him and of his father on Twitter is a huge problem, and he's willing to put people in jail for that. And
it's like if Putin and George Washington married or something. I don't know. Not a kid. It really does seem like he's well balanced, and I watched him for a long time, not in the depth that you guys have, but I remember when after the Khashoggi affair, and then I think it was Lindsey Graham was saying he was unstable and he was crazy, he was a madman. Some of our politicians were saying that, and the more I looked at him, the more I was like, I don't think this guy's a madman. You know, he's not running around tooling at the mouth like Donald Trump. He's calculated. Like, I can see the cunning and the calculation on him. Like, if I was around him, I don't know, I'd just probably crap my pants the whole time and smile at him and be like, I'm cool with you, man. Don't.
No, I mean, look, and this is not a secret. Like, over the course of reporting for the Wall Street Journal, we spent time with him, and your interaction with someone face to face is like, can be it really is of limited value. You don't know what's inside someone, but from all of our work, I have seen no evidence that he's a madman. I think he's very, he's a planner, and he's organized, and he has a very loyal organization of people. I mean, one of his greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses is that for years, since before his father was king, he's prized loyalty over anything else. And so the people who became closest to him and the people he's most empowered are defined by their loyalty, not necessarily their competence or knowledge or abilities. And so I think the things that have gone wrong, and Khashoggi is, obviously, like, it's an unspeakably horrible, unacceptable act. But, Khashoggi has gone wrong. His campaign in Yemen, where they've it's resulted in starvation and bombing, school children and horrible atrocities. Those problems aren't the result of madness. They're the result of, like, mistakes or failures to do things right. They're not necessarily impetuous. So, from what we've gathered about Khashoggi, what MBS says is that he never gave an order to kill him. It was men working for him. They're the ones who did the killing, and it was unacceptable. And he's I take responsibility because they were working for me, but I didn't say to kill him. The CIA determined that he likely gave an order to kill them. From what we can gather from their reporting, and based on historically, Saudi Arabia doesn't kill someone in that situation. Historically, Saudi Arabia kidnaps that person and brings it back to the kingdom. And we have a chapter in our book where the same guy who was in charge of the Khashoggi affair engineered the kidnapping of a prince who'd been criticizing Salman. And they put him on a plane, and this guy, Saud Al-Qahtani, who was working directly for MBS, posed as the plane's captain. And they convinced the guy to get on the plane, and they brought him back to Saudi Arabia. He hasn't been seen since. And so given that that's the way they tend to do things, it seems likely that what happened with Khashoggi is these guys were told to deal with it. They probably thought they had license to kill him. Maybe they were given explicit license to kill him, maybe implicit license to kill him. It seems like most likely the plan was to kidnap him, and they realized it would be harder than they thought, and so they just decided to kill him in the embassy or in the consulate. So it's hard to tell if there was an explicit order and an implicit order, but whatever it was, these guys were working directly for MBS, and they felt like they had license to kill this guy. So it doesn't really matter what the words were that he said. It matters that he's ultimately responsible for it.
I would agree with you. I would say he probably gave the order that said, look, either bring him back, and either he walks back or he comes back in pieces. I mean, I kind of look at some, like a lot of these leaders I look at, like I've been a CEO of my own company since I was 18. I've had thousands of employees. I look at things as to how I would run things if I ran a government. That sounds kind of scary the way I put that in it. Like my eyebrows are like, I would run things. But no, it's interesting to me. I can see the intimidation tactic of it. I believe, if I recall the reporting correctly, MBS was surprised at the blowback, or the Saudis were.
Well, yeah, I think they were, because I think the way they saw it initially was he's a Saudi citizen. It's, you know, if I mean, one way to, and I hesitate to draw parallels, but one way to understand how they look at it is if we find there's a KGB agent in America, a Russian KGB agent in America, we send him back home. We deport the guy. But if we find there's an American working for the KGB, then it's treason, and the person gets tried and imprisoned. And so it's the difference is that they saw this is a Saudi, and for them he was also someone who was intimately connected to the royal family. He worked as a spokesman for the Saudi embassy in the U.S. and in the U.K. He was sort of the royal court. So they saw this as one of their own who was now in America, making them look bad to the citizens of Saudi Arabia's biggest ally. But he was a Saudi, and so they could do as they wished with him. And so I think they were surprised that there was this incredible blowback where the world kind of rallied. Why did you kill an independent journalist? Well, he's not an independent journalist. He's a Saudi guy who was criticizing us. And I think, we mentioned in the book that, MBS said to a person who was asking about this, he's like, oh, look at this. Now the world sees me as a journalist killer. The world sees me as a murderer. This is horrible. I think even if that's what he is, he doesn't want to be seen as that. And I think, sort of to go back, you're talking about being the CEO of your own company. You are bound by the rules of America, the laws of America. He's in a monarchy, he doesn't really have any laws or rules that apply to him. And nominally there are, but really, the king is the state, and he's kind of making up his own rules. And I think through some of these, through Khashoggi and other things, it's been sort of a harsh lesson that, the rest of the world has these rules that they get very, very angry if I break.
Yeah. I think one of the miscalculations was, there were some factors to it, and I'm not dismissing the horror and the wrongness of it, but there were some factors to it. One of them was just the grotesque way that it went down, the dismembering of him, being able to get the audio of what went on. It was stomach turning, and then the guy's a Washington Post journalist. So, I mean, you just took on the Washington Post and probably every journalist and press journalist in the world. He might have been a lot better off if they just kidnapped him and thrown him in a car and brought him back, and they probably would have a whole lot less fallout. But the grisly details were what really, that got everybody. That got me, especially when you listen to the tape. You realize the scenario of his pending wife sitting up front, waiting for him, innocently thinking, oh, he's going to come out and we're going to get married. And you're just like, oh my God, the horror of, and then to find out later what's going on. So yeah, I think, like you say, maybe unintended consequences, but still, yeah, finding out what's going on in the world.
But back on the theme of sort of prizing loyalty over aptitude, everything you talked about here, the reason that stuff came out is his team, after the murder, the Saudis were badly outmaneuvered by the Turks in this. So first off, they don't realize that their consulate is bugged, right? How do you not? I mean, whether the bugs were Turkish or some other country, they don't realize it's bugged. Number one. Number two, MBS seemed to think that he could kind of. There was no way the Turks were going to, in any way, kind of gain a foothold over him. And what the Turks did is, there had been tension between Turkey and Salman and MBS. And Erdogan, the president of Turkey, I think, had wanted better relations, and it was pretty tense. And so Turkey tried to use this as sort of a way of well, look, why don't you, there's some things you can do for us. Do these things. We'll kind of help, keep this quiet. And the Saudis wouldn't cooperate, so Turkey kept leaking out little bits. There was a recorder to tape, and then more detail on the audio. And it would seem like every day for several weeks it looked worse and worse and worse, because the Turks were really good at outmaneuvering them. But, it seemed like the Turks' goal was to try to get Salman, the king, to kind of take some power away from MBS, to push him aside. And I think in the eyes of the world, the Turks won by kind of exposing this horror and making MBS look like a murderer. But ultimately, they lost because he has more power than ever. And so, and that's the other thing, is MBS is playing a long game where right now it looks really bad. And like in an electoral, in a democracy, we elect a president, this would be, this is a horrible scandal. But he's looking, 40 or 50 years down the road. And so MBS he could be king for 50 years. So, I think that he can lose and sometimes still win.
Yeah. It's interesting what they can do in that country too, as well. You saw right away they started buying I think at one point they were kind of pseudo holding hostage one of Khashoggi's children, and then they pretty much bought the family off. I don't know how I feel about that. I remember reading the stories going, I don't know how you'd feel if you offered me $10 million and you killed my dad, but I don't know. We can talk about it. But I mean, I guess that once the tragedy has happened, it is what it is. But I think at one point they were kind of holding someone in Saudi Arabia, kind of like one of the palatial things. I was going to make a joke earlier too about the guys who got stuck at the Ritz-Carlton. They should at least be glad they didn't get stuck at Motel 6. So there's that.
Right. I mean, it could have been Howard Johnson,
But your book is really timely. Saudi Arabia just handed down the final ruling, so I'm going to put that in quotes, in Jamal Khashoggi's murder, sentencing 8 to prison terms. And a lot of the death penalties that were going to be pending on these guys were downgraded because the family, got paid and gave them forgiveness, I guess. And that's the whole thing. It's a really freaking weird setup because you're just like...
The justice system, right. The justice system there has a provision for blood money, where if you have a family member who's murdered, you can reach an agreement with the murderer to pay you some money and either get off or not be killed or have lesser charges. And it's very foreign to us. It's also, again, a place where I think some of the rules or the laws are maybe not, are often interpretations of Islamic law. It's not like here, like the laws are a little more clear. Like you look at your state laws, the sentencing guidelines, and it's not like that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I was just reading too, I can't remember who reported it. It might've been WAPO. They're reporting that there was a huge ramp up, but I think like you say, he's won in the end because I don't know if he'll fully ever recover from the Khashoggi killings. But it definitely sends a message to your enemies. Like, don't screw with me, man. You'll end up.
Yeah, intentional or not, it's a very clear message. And yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard to imagine, and that'll always be a stain for him. Yeah. Partially because of the brutality, but partially because of the asymmetry between what the guy was doing and what was done to him. He was criticizing people. People criticize people every day, and then he gets head chopped off. So. Yeah, I agree, but it does send the message. I think it's very clear to people in Saudi Arabia right now, and as we've written in some cases, people outside Saudi Arabia, like some of these dissidents who had their Twitter accounts hacked and had action taken against them, that it can be very unsafe to question him, even gently.
Yeah. Recently, and I think you guys cover this in the book, he goes to war with Russia over oil and oil prices and oil control, doesn't he?
I mean, this is one of the kind of like stunning world events that we've all forgotten about in the COVID times. But yeah, he and it's another one of these sort of maybe giant miscalculations, but for several years, the price of oil has been depressed for 2014, and for several years Russia and the OPEC countries, which is basically Saudi Arabia is most important, had this agreement that they were going to keep keep oil production down to keep the price up. And it's this kind of different, it's just like tough situation because what everyone wants is for everyone else to produce less oil and they can sell more oil. And so, the negotiations are always hard, but things got tense with Russia. And in his consolidation of power, MBS put one of his older brothers in charge of the oil ministry in Saudi Arabia. So he has a brother who is, or half brother, who's in charge of oil. In the past, it was always, a non-royal. And so they got frustrated with Russia and decided, we've had enough of haggling with Russia over trying to keep oil production low. We can weather low oil prices much better than they can. So we're going to screw them, and we're just going to flood the world with oil. And so Saudi Arabia, increased the production of oil, drove the price down. It was a record oil price fall. And I think sort of miscalculated how Putin would react. And, I think Putin and MBS are similar in the sense that it's very hard to pressure either of them. When you try to back either of them into a corner, there's never any backing down. And, Putin didn't back down, and eventually they all had to kind of, reach an agreement and come back to it. But yeah, they, out of a combination of anger and an expectation to be able to pressure Russia, they tanked the world oil price, put a bunch of American fracking companies on the brink of extinction, and had all sorts of collateral effects that were not of concern to them.
Who actually won that battle? Because I know Putin basically sits on a giant gas station. That's pretty much the Russian economy. Yeah,
I know. It's such a hard question because, again, Putin's old, and when Putin's gone, who knows what happens with Russian politics? But MBS is young. Once he becomes king, he could reign for decades. But also, he has his family's. He has the family rule at heart, so he's looking much further down the road. So in the short term, it doesn't really look like Saudi Arabia won because they gave up a lot of money. They sold something that they could sell for a lot of money for very little money in huge volumes to reach a short-term political goal that they appear to have not reached. But in the long run, maybe there's value in showing the world, look, something to understand since the 70s, one of the sort of tacit foundations of the American-Saudi alliance is that Saudi Arabia will not screw with world oil supply. Since the oil embargo, the U.S. was very dependent on Middle Eastern oil, no longer is, but the idea was Saudi Arabia is going to keep pumping oil no matter what political issues there are. And one message MBS is sending is you know what? I'm willing to screw with oil prices. I'm willing to upend the oil market in furtherance of my goals. And that's a message, similar to the Khashoggi thing, that you're communicating something to the rest of the world that could be of value for decades.
Do you guys get in the book? We had yesterday, we had on Seth Abramson, Proof of Corruption, his third book in the trilogy. And we talked a little bit about the Saudis' interest in nuclear power plants with the Trump administration, Jared Kushner. And then, of course, I believe they got some of the nuclear technology that puts them on the precipice of becoming nuclear power if they gear their stuff right.
Yeah, some of my colleagues at the Journal have written recently that they're working on some non-public nuclear projects, and so far it looks like power generation. But their biggest fear is Iran. It's nearby, and they are long-standing enemies. And when you talk to people in the Saudi royal court or in the UAE, their ally, they speak of the Persians. They don't talk about Iran. They talk about the Persians as if it's people, a people with a history of having an empire that's long been at odds with the Arabs. And so they see it as this deep historical, it's a deep historical enmity. And the idea that Iran has nuclear weapons and Saudi Arabia is somehow at a disadvantage is intolerable for them, So I think that it's hard to imagine they wouldn't be pursuing that.
Yeah. And I guess there's some details that go into that. We recently saw, I watched a video, I think last night, where it was Jared Kushner with his punchable face, I should mention. Very punchable face. Not that I would punch his face, but I'm just saying it's a very punchable face. He always reminds me of that act dude from Martians Will Invade or whatever. But they were on the flight, that first flight that now goes directly from Saudi Arabia to, I believe, Israel. And so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think Kushner showed up what to do. The flight, so UAE recognized Israel, and which is a big. It's more symbolic than anything else. It's not like there was this long-standing war between the United Arab Emirates and Israel as Nassau, but UAE is Saudi Arabia's closest ally in the region, and the UAE recognized Israel, and in that first flight, it flew through Saudi airspace, and Kushner went over there. And in a way, this is, I think the Trump administration is framing it as a giant foreign policy win for the U.S. I think what it looks like is the UAE, in a way, was sort of sending out like a trial balloon to kind of see what reaction is in the Gulf region. And if it's not too, if it wasn't too negative a reaction, I think, Saudi Arabia would consider following, partially because they really have softened in their approach to Israel. Because, a generation ago, the Palestinian cause was of deep importance to the Saudis. And I think they got frustrated with the Palestinians. I think they sort of lost interest. And at the same time, MBS has embraced Israeli military and intelligence technology. And there's been this sort of not so private relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel about sharing technology. And as we write in the book, one of MBS's big projects is this sort of city-state he's going to build from scratch in the Northwest. It's quite close to Israel, and they've had talks about bringing Israeli technology in there. So the idea of formalizing the relationship in the historical context sounds like insane and unthinkable, but really it wouldn't be that different from the status quo right now. And it would also, if it came before the election, be, something that Donald Trump could say, look what I have to show. I got Saudi Arabia to come to peace with Israel after all these decades. So it could be like a big kind of pre-election boost for him.
Maybe we can have one of those Clinton moments where was it Assad? And who was it? I forget the gentleman's name. I think he was assassinated. But they shook on the White House lawn. If you remember that moment, it was like the biggest farce ever. It wasn't Assad. I don't know. I don't remember. The old brain's going in the old age. Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they see Iran as maybe we should just be better friends with Israel because we got Iran to deal with.
Exactly, that's precisely it. I mean, that's sort of what in MBS's view of the world, Israel Israel's not an enemy. Israel is someone with historical tension. Israel is an enemy, but Iran's the biggest enemy, and Iran is Israel's biggest enemy. And the enemy of my enemy is mine has become a much more powerful thing now that the Saudi-Iran tension is much more kind of visceral than it was before. The Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen is sort of a proxy war with Iran. So it's just become a lot. Iran has become much more a priority than Israel.
There you go. That's I love how you said that. The enemy of my enemy. Was there anything that surprised you in the book that stood out that you went, holy moly?
I mean, a lot. That's one of the reasons we wrote the book, is because everything was really surprising. But one thing that we've written about and talked about a lot is this. He has this $500 billion plan to build a city-state in the Red Sea with flying robot taxis and bring sort of international tech companies there. But and that was surprising in sort of its superficial details. But the thing that was really shocking about that to me is that it sort of outlined this vision, what his vision is for Saudi Arabia. So this is going to be a place where it has its own governance system, where every aspect of governance reports to him. The courts, law enforcement, everything reports up to MBS, and there's 100% surveillance of everyone there at all times. He wants an international population of highly educated people working in tech. He wants to have world-class resorts and industry and living, and he kind of wants it all in the same place. And it shows this vision he has for Saudi Arabia, which is a place that simultaneously, has the trappings of freedom with the security of an iron-fisted monarchy. And it's something that is, maybe China is even the model. China doesn't have the oil money. China doesn't have that incredible, per capita wealth, but it's a model where you kind of have the freedom to make money and the freedom to, eat out at a nice restaurant and to take a flying robot taxi, but you don't have any say in your own governance. Yeah. There's been no move to sort of give the Saudi people their own any like self-determination. And to me, that's continually surprising, even though it's like the most basic defining factor there.
He's like Putin, who cares and has empathy, wants something better for his country in the future, but he's still Putin. Kind of like a mix of all that stuff. So, any last things we need to know about your guys' great book?
Yeah, look, I think something I think that we often lose sight of, we meaning Bradley and I, when you're talking about it, is to us at least, the story is so interesting, like the palace intrigue and what happens within Saudi Arabia, the decisions he makes to do things. But he's an incredibly important person internationally, especially in sort of the geopolitics, but in business and in America as well. And that's, another one of the most surprising things is, his vision for Saudi Arabia is to move the country away from its dependence on oil and create a diversified economy. And he thinks one way to do that is to invest billions and billions and billions of dollars in international tech companies. So he's the world's biggest venture capitalist. And a lot of this tech bubble we see where, dog walking companies are getting tens of millions of dollars for dogs. Like, so things that you look at and you're like, are you assuming that like an unending, infinite growth in the number of dogs and people who will pay to watch? Like, these things are like on the surface, like the value doesn't work out. That bubble is being pumped up with Saudi money. So many of these things we've seen in America, especially in California, with these insane tech valuations, and WeWork is probably the poster child. These companies that like you can't understand why they're so valuable, but all of a sudden they're everywhere. They're in our face. It's MBS's sort of this belief that if he takes a huge amount of money and like says we're going to innovate, we're going to make a lot of money, that it can happen. That's what's behind it, and that's something that I think is like important to remember.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch because my background is Silicon Valley and tech and what we've always done on the show. I believe he owned a lot of investment into SoftBank, and of course SoftBank's crazy investments, especially with like you mentioned WeWork,
over $40 billion into the SoftBank fund, called the Vision Fund. That is, they're the ones that boosted WeWork when it was clear that it was an office space rental company. They decided it was a tech company, and we know what happened there. And so it's his willingness to make these gigantic financial bets without like a whole lot of due diligence has kind of had profound economic effects.
Yeah, I really see him as a really smart guy. I don't see him as a crazy madman. I see him as a calculating. Maybe he's cunning when he needs to be. I think I like what he's doing for Saudi Arabia. It seems to be bringing in the world. people aren't throwing rocks as much at like, well, women can't drive and they don't have rights, and so I think he sees too as not only that's a good thing, but it helps him retain power because we've seen the Arab Spring, uprisings that overthrew a lot of these autocrats. They're like, you can't have anything and I get everything, and he realizes, much like the Machiavellian prince, that you've got to balance. You've got to somehow create a balance between the two. I think I wish the war in Yemen would stop, or at least the Trump administration would help stop it, which they won't. But that's a whole new bag of whatever. So there you go. Guys, pick up the book. It's available now from Amazon and other resources. Blood and Oil, Mohammed bin Salman's Ruthless Quest for Global Power by Bradley Hope and Justin Scheck, who's been here with us today. I love the book. I mean, getting to understand this guy, and this guy's young. He's going to be a player in the world for the next, 70 years or whatever. Anything more you want to give us your plugs as we go out, Justin?
No, that's it. No, there's much more in the book.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on. This has been enjoyable.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion, too, to get into this guy because I just find him curious and we're leaders. And, of course, I'm probably going to have to live with him and hopefully I stay on his nice side.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Good night. Thank you very much, Justin. Thanks, my audience, for tuning in. Be sure to see the video version of this. I think you will like it. YouTube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification. For the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives, dogs, cats, mistresses, pool boys. Get them watching and listening to the show because I don't know, they'll be better off in life and smarter because of it. Order the books. You can go to amazon.com/shop/Chris Voss. You can click on all the wonderful books. You're like, hey, I want to see all the great authors who've been on the Chris Voss Show, and I want to support them, and I want to buy their amazing books. You can easily do that through that link. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.